Little bit of housekeeping for everybody's awareness. You might have noticed that we are just started recording. We will be recording the presentation component of this meeting, just so for everybody's awareness. We have the chat open and the Q&A feature as well. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat and the Q&A as we go through the presentation. I also just want to flag for everybody that if you have an AI note taker, we respectfully ask you to turn that off. So as members of the state, any records that come from this presentation, since we are state officials, will become part of the Public Records Act. And so if there's any questions that you want to ask or anything that you want to have a more direct, frank conversation with, just flagging that for your awareness. Please know that our team is also note-taking our end as well to take any feedback, comments, concerns that you present to us in the chat and Q&A. Oh no, the mic is garbled. Thank you for that flag, Mariano. Okay, I'm going to try to sit a little bit closer. Is this better now if I enunciate?
I can hear you just fine, Ann.
Okay, awesome. If at any point technical difficulties arise, please feel free to let me know. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. Just a brief introduction to the CNRA Tribal Affairs Grant Team. My name is Ann Deep. I'm our Tribal Funding Program Manager. I help administer the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Grant Program alongside my colleagues Elaine and Pete. And needing no introduction, we have our lovely Deputy Secretary of Tribal Affairs and our Deputy Director of Tribal Affairs here as well joining this meeting. And so we have a lot to cover today, and so I just want to give everybody a high-level agenda overview of all the topics we'll be going through, and we're going to try to save as much time as possible for the Q&A towards the end. So apologies if it seems very rushed. I want to give you as great of a lay of the land of all the great updates and changes we've been doing. But just as an overview, we're going to be going over the background of this grant program, the climate bond funding overview and breakdown as it relates to the grant program's funding, the proposed new guidelines, especially such as things as new eligible activities that we would like to highlight, the proposed new application process, scoring rubrics, and then ending on the tentative timeline to kind of orientate ourselves to everything. And so our Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Grant Program was really established from the consultation and feedback that we received from strategies of the Pathways to 30 by 30, the Natural Working Land Strategy, and most importantly, Executive Order N8220, which laid forth the foundation of nature-based solutions and the work to come. And in the spirit of Executive Order N1519, which was the governor's apology to tribes, which also established the Truth and Healing Council, alongside the Statement of Administrative Policy on Native American ancestral lands. All those went towards informing the creation of the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Grant Program to support acquisition, planning activities, implementation for California Native American tribes, and the benefit of California ecosystems and the environment. And so what I have on the slide right here is just a highlight of the previous grant program guidelines and a little poster of our 2024 awardees and the great work that they're doing statewide right now. And so in November of 2024, California voters passed Proposition 4, also known as the Climate Bond, which authorizes $10 billion in funding to support projects that protect people and nature from the effects of climate change. What I have for you on the slide here is a breakdown of how those $10 billion are allocated into various different topic areas, if you will. And what I want to draw your attention to is this text at the bottom. At least 40% of climate bond funds must go towards projects with direct benefits to vulnerable populations, disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. And so for the purposes of the climate bond in this grant program, California Native American tribes count as part of the vulnerable populations definition. This was done intentionally, so our tribal partners do not have to work to justify that information as part of the application process. And so our grant program, the TNBS grant program, was allocated $10 million through the climate bond, and $9.225 million are available for grant funds. Our grant program is anticipating that some general funds will be available for escrow-ready projects. And one thing I want to draw your attention towards is since we are now shifting this program's priorities to also fulfill bond requirements as well, um, via bond funding, since they are a large investment on behalf of the state, they're very tax heavy. The state treasury really favors capital investments. That is, acquisitions of physical assets. This in turn has informed this grant team's update, if you will, of our draft grant guidelines. And so to fulfill those bond obligations and our program priorities, the draft grant guidelines are currently proposing ancestral land return projects as the primary project type to be supported. That is, moving forward, land acquisition projects with a planning component and or an implementation component will be the eligible projects for this round of funding. In terms of grant amounts, we're proposing a minimum request of $1 million, with the maximum request being that total available funding, aka that 9.225 million. And for budgetary limits to sort of like support those like physical acquisitions, capital investment, there's going to be a 25% cap on non-acquisition associated costs. There will be a 10% cap on contingency costs, where the grantee will just have to reprogram that back into the budget before spending, and in alignment with the climate bond language, a 20% cap on standard indirect costs or overhead, but federally recognized tribes may substitute a federally negotiated rate. In terms of eligible applicants, this includes California Native American tribes and tribally led entities located within California. Applications submitted by non-tribal entities, however, must meet these two requirements. First and foremost, they must confirm that a California Native American tribe or tribes are actively partnering with in a meaningful way. So this could be through either a signed council resolution or a signed letter from the chairperson of the tribe. And the non-tribal entity will be required to describe how that project will serve the supporting tribe and the communities. And you'll see this reflected in the application questions. And so just a super high level overview of the eligible project activities. I recommend that you review pages 10 to 11 for the complete detailed list. But something that I really want to highlight that's new that we're excited about as a grant team for this round as it relates to acquisition associated costs is the purchase option. And so one of the biggest feedback and lessons learned that we heard from, the very first round of TMBS and just grant programs in general around land acquisition is the need for more flexible sort of like pathways to support, acquisition, negotiations, and et cetera, especially if there's accelerated timelines. And so a eligible fundable activity now is the purchase options if the value of that option is then applied to the larger sale within the fair market value of that property to be acquired. So you can think of this as that good faith money or deposit. Another new allowable activities that we really want to highlight that we're excited about is development and housing on acquired lands. So in an effort to support the diverse needs of Native American tribes, grantees may identify future proposed development on these to be acquired properties inside their application. And so these development locations need to be, ID'd in the application with as much detail as feasible, must be consistent with and not impede the proposed nature-based solutions. And within that sort of like development definition, we're also allowing housing. So some permanent housing development on acquired lands is allowable, but not fundable by these grant funds. They will be fundable if there is a clear tie to the proposed nature-based solutions project overall. And so to kind of expand on this, what do I mean by development? What do I mean by housing? So for example, workforce housing tied to a nature-based solution, such as summer work crews, fire crews, stewardship camps. Think like, bringing Native youth back to the land to learn how to do stewardship activities and learn their traditional practices. Projects that support nature-based solutions, economic development opportunities, so things like a native plant nursery, ecotourism, projects that rebuild upon damage, retrofit, enhance, or build upon existing foundations of existing developments, all tied to and all in the support of nature-based solutions. And I mentioned escrow ready projects earlier, and so just to go over this process, escrow ready ancestral land return projects will be required to do a combined step 1 and step 2 application. So this is a big process that we're asking for essentially all the complete information up front. Escrow ready projects will need to unencumber these funds or enter into grant agreement by March 31st of 2027. And to meet the expedited encumbrance expenditure deadlines, escrow-ready projects will need to utilize the grant agreement template as is, and therefore applicants will forego negotiation. We understand that this is a very big ask of our Native American tribal partners, and this is to simply meet just those tight timelines associated with these funds. We are trying to be as flexible as possible. However, so deed restrictions, the work plan, and the budget will still be able to undergo negotiation for finalization before grant agreement execution. And so projects that are eligible for TNBS funds but weren't awarded during this escrow ready phase will automatically be included into the standard grant review process for further consideration. And so as part of the new priorities through the climate bond, we also updated our competitive priorities to have new considerations. Everything that is highlighted here reflects said new consideration for this upcoming round. So just to quickly go through them, if the project has an existing management plan on a property adjacent to the proposed acquisition is seeking implementation funding to execute the existing plan. This really came from feedback that continuous funding to support good work that's been done previously, whether that was funding a planning project. Now we need those sort of like implementation dollars to continue that work through. This is where that came from. Projects with secured partial funding and can demonstrate that these funds, the TNBS funds, will fund the whole acquisition at fair market value. This really came from, again, the fact that bond funds are very expensive. They require that capital investment. So this is almost sort of like a feasibility priority, if you will. Projects that have economic development and financing planning for multi-benefit nature-based solutions projects. So we don't want to get in the way of supporting anything that could help with the long-term management of these conserved lands, and projects that limit their development to no more than 10% of the total property acreage in perpetuity. And so I want to stress that if your project proposes development more than 10%, that doesn't make you ineligible. It is still an eligible project for application and submission, but we are saying that you will get competitive points if you limit that development to no more than 10% of the property acreage. And so to go over this new two-step application, for those of you who are familiar with our previous guidelines or maybe looked at our old guidelines, it was a four-step application. We really put a lot of effort into streamlining and making this as straightforward as possible and removing all redundancies. And so there is a new two-step application for the applicant, and then a final third step for evaluation internally with the grant team. And so this first step is that preliminary project proposal, where we really just evaluate the project for eligibility. Incomplete or ineligible projects will be removed from this competitive process. And then the step 2 will be that final complete project proposal, where we'll be doing the scoring and the and the applicant will be meeting with the grant team for a project presentation. And so for the next couple slides, I'll be going over very high level what is entailed within the step 1 and the step 2 and the updates that we made. So for our step 1, please note everything that's highlighted is just kind of like the latest and greatest updates that we've added to this process that we hope are quality of life changes for everybody going through the application process. Another thing I want to highlight as well is that throughout the step 1 process, TNBS staff will be providing technical assistance in the form of open office hours and application webinars through the submission period. And so, as a summary of step 1 updates, as I mentioned, we've shortened application proposal questions, removing whatever just does not make sense or was a little bit unclear from the previous iteration. And we're also requesting a draft work plan and timeline in this pre-app to allow for that earlier project feedback opportunity between the applicant and the TNBS grant staff. We also, most importantly, updated communications. So we have an updated willing seller letter with key information from our sister agency, the Department of General Services. So that way your willing seller isn't suddenly surprised by the bureaucracy of the state and like all the processes that the property will need to go through in order for it to be an eligible purchase. And then most importantly for, I think our tribal partners, summarizing those key program considerations into a notice checklist. So that way applicant is aware of like the important needs for this program and the conditions of funding, such as the need for a limited waiver of sovereign immunity, the need for public access on these acquired lands, the need for deed restrictions to be recorded to title, acquisitions must be at fair market value with that appraisal report approved by the Department of General Services. So after projects pass through the step one eligibility check, they will move into the step two, where essentially everything that you prepare for that pre-app, the step one, it'll become a package. You just append it right on top. Short, sweet, simple. No need to repeat anything or copy and paste. And then if you have a updated work plan, updated budget, this is where you would also like provide us just that new one, or we can keep the same one from the first project, and the project funding priority questions. And most excitingly, this presentation component that I mentioned earlier. And so summary of updates again, streamlining, removing those redundant proposal questions, improving question clarity. So project questions are now a lot more specific and have more details to really help guide the applicant into providing the answers that we're looking for, to give the details that we need to kind of evaluate the project. And so we hope that's a lot more straightforward. We also have improved our templates. So things like the work plan, budget, cost estimate templates now have detailed columns with examples put inside of them. So that way you're not staring at just like, blank boxes trying to spin your wheels on like, okay, what information do you need? What level of detail? And lastly, that interactive component, this meeting presentation. As part of the application step two, applicants will be asked to present their project and meet with the Team PS grant team. And I'm most excited about this because I view this as an opportunity to connect deeper on proposed projects and allow both sides, both parties, to really ask questions of each other to better understand the project. Yeah. And so next, we're going to go ahead and go over step one and step two, very high level. So for the step one rubric, and if you're following along on your computer on the draft guidelines, this is page 40. The goal of this step one rubric is really to ensure that the project meets the statutory and programmatic requirements for eligibility. This is not an evaluation of the competitiveness. And then for step two, this is the rubric that will be used to assess that project competitiveness for final award decision and recommendation. So please note, the scoring key as well as the scoring considerations for our ancestral land return planning and implementation components. The rubric really mirrors those competitive priorities that were laid earlier in this presentation. And again, if you're following on your computer at home, this is pages 41 through 45 of the draft grant guidelines. And then finally, step three, that internal step, after throughout the evaluation and scoring process, Team BS staff might at our discretion conduct site visits to gather more information and or request supporting additional documents, all to inform those final award decisions. And I know it just zoomed through, but we're at the end now, folks. For a tentative timeline, just to help orientate everybody, this past summer, we released this draft grant guidelines. We are currently here in the late summer fall stage in the middle of our 90-day consultation period. For your awareness, consultation and public comment ends November 25th, 2025. Then over winter, staff will spend this time reviewing to integrate all of this feedback with the hope of releasing solicitation in spring. So in January, February, March, this is going to be that step one window, then April, May, June for our step two. And then lastly, we're going to spend that sort of like late summer, early fall reviewing the award decisions. With announcements to come hopefully in the late fall of 2026. I want to flag to everybody listening that, we're trying to get this funding out as soon as possible, hence this very ambitious timeline. But the final timeline and final solicitation releases will most likely depend on both the feedback that we receive as well as just the formal regulations process that we'll be going through to review these guidelines. But please know that the utmost goal is to get this funding out to you ASAP, so that way you can do the good work that you're doing. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you so much for your time. Just repeating some crucial information here. If you are a tribal partner or if one of your tribal partners is interested in consultation, please email us at tribalaffairs@resources.ca.gov. And thank you so much for your time and your consideration. I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up and start entering into some Q&A then.
Wado, and thank you so much, Anne, for walking us through the proposed edits and updates to the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Grant Program. I warmly welcome folks to use the Q&A feature or the chat feature if you have any questions for the grant team. And then also for folks who are joining us online who want to provide written comments on the draft proposed grant guidelines, please feel free to do that as well. We ask for those written comments to be received by November 25th, and you can use that tribalaffairs@resources.ca.gov email as well.
Sorry, just looking at the Q&A. Okay. After awards are announced, what is the estimated duration of award negotiations? That's an excellent question, Sandra. I wouldn't say that there is an exact timeline. I think the goal is always ASAP to encumber the funds as soon as possible. We have a lot of valuable lessons learned from, this first iteration. So we've done things to kind of improve this process overall. So for example, you'll notice in the draft grant guidelines that our, template documents now have very helpful sort of like highlights, bolds, and like, placeholder language to really signal like, hey, this is where we need your feedback and this is where we want to like have discussions with you. But I would say that like, negotiations are really dependent on the project, the type of project, and just overall availability by both parties to meet and confer on said negotiations. Awesome questions. Okay, let's see. Will one-on-one technical assistance be available? Thank you so much, Selena. Great question. On top of those like sort of like helpful webinars, the staff is intending to have those open office hours. But when I read one-on-one, I'm hearing more like scheduled appointments. I know that staff is open to that. I think that will just be dependent on like staff availability and scheduling to do that sort of like one-on-one assistance. But this is something that the staff is prepared for. When is the grant supposed to open? Thank you so much, Guy. Let me go ahead and just go back real fast to our tentative timeline. This is what we're hoping it's going to open is spring of 2026. But as I mentioned, this is all going to be the final timeline is going to be dependent on how much feedback we receive and just going through that formal regulations rulemaking process. And I'm just bouncing back and forth between chat and Q&A to make sure I'm not missing anything. I do see that Melina has raised her hand. Sorry, thanks, Megan. Do we know how to sort that, Geneva? We had a raised hand from the audience, but I don't know if the current Teams meeting setup will, because I believe we're in a
Thanks for the
webinar
question,
format.
Melina. I recommend that you use the Q&A feature that's in the top of the screen.
And I just noticed, sorry, that you can comment on the questions too for clarification. That's really cool. Selena clarified, I meant would you be hiring a third party to provide individualized application development assistance? Thank you so much for that clarification, Selena. We will not be doing that. Technical assistance will be provided by the Team BS grant team. Can you share the link to the website, please? Yes. Apologies. Let me go ahead and stop screen sharing real fast so I can pull those links. I dropped the links in the chat earlier, but I think Teams does the thing where if you join the meeting later on, like those chat messages are lost to you for some reason. But let me go ahead and redrop these links. Right. The top link is just to our grant program overall. It's a high-level view of the program and all the information I gave as a background. The second link is to our draft guidelines that we are currently in consultation and public comment for. And that third link is to the CNRA Climate Bond informational website. And so they'll have a lot of resources about, climate bond language, the state grants portal, and how to navigate that for other climate bond related funding as it exists beyond this grant program as well. Please drop it in Q&A as chat is not. Oh no, I'm so sorry, Melina. Yeah, dropping that right here. Okay, I hope you can see it. Great. All right, and there's more questions now. I'm gonna go ahead. Let's see. Confirming eligible projects must include a land acquisition capital component to support planning, implementation, or combo of both. Thank you so much, Tim. Yes, so for this iteration, the 3 types of projects that will be supported all have to have a acquisition component. So let me just go ahead and screen share this again because visuals are always helpful. All right. But yes, the 3 types of projects will be an ancestral land return, so an acquisition and planning. You can do acquisition and implementation, or you can do all 3 into a comboed. So thank you so much, Tim. And then follow-up question from that. As a city government, could a partnership with a tribal association classified as a nonprofit that is not recognized federally, or the state be an eligible applicant? Let me go ahead and, oh, perfect. Eligible applicant is the next slide. Yeah. And so, as a non-tribal entity, we would just ask that your project meet these 2 requirements. Once again, confirm that you are partnering with a California Native American tribe. Through the Climate Bond Act, the language defines a California Native American tribe to include both federally and non-federally recognized tribes. I'm going to see if I can pull the exact language and drop that in the chat for you, Bella. And then, of course, describing how that project will serve the supporting tribe and community as part of that project. So let me go ahead and copy and paste that language for you. I do that. Let me know if I'm missing anything, Megan or Geneva.
Sure, I have the definition right here. I'll paste it in the chat for folks.
Okay, great. And then I'll paste it in the Q&A, so it's there in both places. Sweet. All right. I am scrolling through the questions to make sure I'm not missing anything. I did miss something. Okay. When you say tribes, do you mean with and without federal recognition? How are you determining eligibility? Great. I think our question just addressed that one. So thank you so much, Christina. From Brittany, City Pacifica, what tribes and or jurisdictions have had successful nature-based solutions implementation? Oh yeah. I recommend you click onto our the link that I provided, Brittany, in like the bigger chat that leads you to our TNBS grant program website. We have a previous solicitations tab on the bottom of that page that highlights all the previous projects that we've funded, and it has also a map statewide of where all those projects are. Just seeing the question from Courtney, could you repeat what the total available funds will be? Yes, happy to. Total available funds will be 9.225 million. I'm gonna bounce back to Q&A now. If awarded, how quickly will the funds need to be spent? Are the funds provided through escrow? I might defer this to you, Geneva, in terms of encumbrance dates for the funds. Are the funds provided through escrow for land acquisition projects where there's an escrow component? We, the grant team, will be advancing the funds directly to the title company. So we'll be a part of and assisting in that escrow project. And then basically, whatever rest of the funds are needed for implementation or planning, that goes directly to the grantee that is doing that work on the ground. And then does implementation, question for Selena, does implementation mean implementation of the nature-based solution project? In this case, not implementation of the land acquisition. Yes, that is correct. All you can think of like, let me just go to, donde está? Okay, here. If you go to pages 10 to 11 within the draft grant guidelines, it'll lay out what those activities or what we're sort of like defining as activities associated underneath the acquisition bucket versus the implementation bucket. But you are correct. Basically, as currently proposed, 25%, no more than 25% of the requested grant funds can go towards planning or implementation activities, essentially, is how that breakdown works. Great. And scrolling. And thank you for your patience as I kind of bounce back and forth. I'm trying to make sure that we're not skipping any questions. What is the maximum that can be awarded per project? The maximum that we are currently proposing is the entirety of the available grant funds, which is that 9.225 million. Mhm. Going back to the chat. Okay. Oh, following up your question, Melina, minimum and maximum right here. Minimum is a million, maximum is that total available funds, the 9.225 million. And then follow-up question, if this is a second or third round of applications, how many applications received last time versus how many funded? So this is actually the first time that these grant guidelines underneath the climate bonds have been issued. So the program, it's a little bit confusing, so I apologize, but the TNBS grant program was established and we were awarded funds through the Budget Act of 2022 and 2023. And those guidelines were written with general funding statutory requirements in mind. This iteration of TNBS, and hence why we're calling it TNBS Climate Bond, is sort of like, you can think of it as TNBS plus, if you will, because all these updates are not just quality of life updates to improve the program overall, but they are also tied back to the color of the money, so to say, the conditions of funding associated with the climate bond. To answer questions about how many applications received last time versus how many were funded, I don't have that number off the top of my head, unfortunately. But but for how many were funded, you can find that on our website, which is 34 projects statewide.
And maybe if I can add a little bit to this
Please.
question here, and thank you, Melinda, for it. I think you're kind of getting to how competitive is this grant program going to be, right? If I'm reading between the lines on your question, and I think for folks' awareness, we anticipate that this will be a very competitive grant round. Just knowing how the cost of lands within the state of California and the huge need and desire for funding to support tribes in ancestral land return. And so as folks are kind of thinking about what funds to go after and which programs to apply for, just be kind of eyes wide open that we anticipate this to be a very competitive round. Some of the departments underneath the California Natural Resources Agency also have climate bond dollars that are available for acquisition of properties for conservation purposes and are also wanting to partner very closely with tribes on ancestral land return. And so some other departments to keep your eyes on and participate in their grant programs also include the State Coastal Conservancy, the California Wildlife Conservation Board, and then also the Department of Conservation through their SALC program, Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Program, are three really strong programs that have funding available and are very much interested in partnering with tribes on ancestral land return projects. So we can get those links to those different departments. We'll put those in the chat for you all, so you can look at all the wide variety of state funding that we have available for ancestral land return.
Totally. And I am doing that right now. I'm dropping those into the chat.
I think, Anna, I could hop in while you're doing that. I've noticed that a lot of the questions have to do with the type of projects, and kind of that clarity around acquisition, planning, and implementation. So what I'll add for folks attending today is that all projects must have an acquisition component. In addition, all projects must have a planning or implementation component, or both. Right, so it's going to be land acquisition with maybe some sort of plan to manage the land or plan for a nature-based solution. It's going to be land acquisition with, let's say, like stream restoration might be an implementation project, or it could be land acquisition with both. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Megan. I just dropped the link to those three programs and those three departments in the chat, and I'm gonna go ahead and also drop this in. I'm gonna see if I can drop this in Q&A as well, because I think some folks are able to access one but not the other, so that way it's in both places. Let's see. New question. Are future rounds of this funding opportunity anticipated, and if so, roughly when? The Climate Bond Act allocated us this amount, and the team is trying to get this out the door. So if we can't award all of this round, then yes, there will be future rounds. But just like Geneva said, we're anticipating this being extremely competitive, and we want to support the need that exists. And if the 2024 awards taught us anything, the need is great.
And to add additional clarification around this question, we are very much dependent on the budget process that the legislature drives on in allocating funds for different grant projects across the state. And so as we think about future rounds, those are going to be tied to those annual budget bills that are passed through that legislative process. And so for folks who are wanting to kind of keep your eyes on opportunities for funding for ancestral land return, highly recommend watching that budget bill process go through. That is that annual process through the legislature. And so if and when we get appropriated more funds, then we will have future rounds.
Just scrolling through. Check one more time. Thank you, Garrett. Where will a copy of this video be located? We will, correct me if I'm wrong, Geneva, be posting it onto our TNBS grant program webpage. So that very first link that I posted. How does this program relate to, if at all, with 30 by 30? Thank you so much, Courtney. Um, this program actually came from, it was developed from some of the feedback received when CNRA consulted on the 30 by 30 strategy. And so you'll note that one of like the core, I always mix them up. There's like the core commitments and the key objectives. But like, a strong component of the 30 by 30 strategy is to partner with partner with tribes and advance tribal stewardship wherever possible. And so the TNVS grant program, you can see this as the funding dollars to kind of put that work on the ground to support that aspect of the 30 by 30 strategy. And so, as you go through the draft grant guidelines and look at sort of like the questions, you'll note that they are very sort of like framed around like, how does this advance this type of nature-based solution? How does it advance this sort of work? And so that's where it's kind of all tying together.
I think just to add a little more context around this question, and it's a great question for folks who are maybe new to the 30 by 30 space. The goal to conserve 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030 is what we shorten to 30 by 30. And we know that it will take it's an all hands across the state approach for us to meet this goal. And the overarching idea behind conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030 is to ensure that we are having conserved spaces that support people and nature. It supports the biodiversity of this beautiful area and ensuring that we have corridors for that biodiversity to thrive in, especially with eyes wide open around the changing climate. And so, as what Anne was articulating here in the goal for 30 by 30, a core pillar of that work is ensuring that we are strengthening our partnerships with California Native American tribes, because we know that we're not going to reach this goal. We're not going to be able to strengthen the biodiversity, the health of our lands, waters, and airs without that partnership with California Native American tribes. It's been there's such clear evidence out there in the world that tribes, as the original stewards of the land, having that deep place-based traditional ecological knowledge and tribal expertise is critical for the health of California. These lands that we all love and care for have co-evolved with that tribal stewardship, have co-evolved with that traditional ecological knowledge. And so if we really are going to build a more resilient California for all of us, tribes must be a core pillar in that work. And the best way to ensure that tribal stewardship is on the land is actually to return the land back to tribes, back to tribal ownership. Having those tribal laws, those cultural practices be that driver in the care of these lands. And so hopefully that helps kind of connect the dots of why ancestral land return is such a core commitment to that 30 by 30 work, and that we are very much committed in identifying those resources, providing support for tribes, and in this broader conservation work. It also is dovetailing really nicely into our new policy that we are close to finalizing, the tribal stewardship policy, which is really looking at advancing and institutionalizing the work of advancing tribal access, collaboration, which includes co-management and ancestral land return. And we're setting the ambitious goal of seeing meaningful and durable tribal stewardship over at least 7.5 million acres of land within the state, land and coastal waters, and reaching that goal. And so if you're interested in learning more about the tribal stewardship policy, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be very happy to get you some resources and add you to our listserv. But the idea around this policy is ensuring that tribal stewardship, that tribal access, collaboration, and land return is part of the fabric of the state and part of the work that we all need to do to make sure that we're living in a healthy, safe, and fun place, right? Being out in nature is a fun thing to do. It's a healthy thing to do. And so we want to make sure that we are working collaboratively with California Native American tribes to get back to that deep place-based stewardship for the benefit of nature and all of us. So hopefully that's some extra helpful context for everyone.
Thank you so much, Geneva. While you were providing that really helpful background, I was trying to find the answer to Sandra's question, which was the maximum project end date stipulated. Is there one? I know that currently in our draft grant guidelines, we noted that the final encumbrance expenditure and invoice dates will be provided after bond funds are approved and solicitation is released. Trying to track that language down right now.
Yeah,
So,
the encumbrance and expenditure period for the climate bond dollars. So they need to be encumbered by 2028 and then spent down by 2030. I think that's encumbered by, if I'm remembering correctly, would that be March 28 and then spent by March 2030? I believe is
yeah.
usually the cutoff.
That sounds right. I'm trying to find the link to the active one so I can drop in the chat for everybody's reference. So if you hear clicking, apologies, trying to get you all the
Are
helpful
you trying to
links.
find the budget bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
And while I do that, another. Okay, great. Just making sure I'm not missing questions. Mm. So as part of the Budget Act of 2025, mm,
How about we work on finding that expenditure and encumbrance period language, and we can follow up with folks on that.
sounds great.
Yeah, so you don't have to find it live. But
That's
I
great.
think the important dates are 2028 and 2030.
Thank you, Geneva. You know how it goes. Whenever you need to find the link, you can never find it when you're under pressure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Courtney, just saw your question. Does the signed willing seller letter need to reference an agreed upon price? Ooh, that's a really good question. The template as is does not reference price. Instead, it references the phrase fair market value. Fair market value is determined through an appraisal, which the grantee slash applicant is free to work with. Your chosen appraiser. The important part is that the appraisal report outlining and justifying that fair market value price needs to meet DGS compliance. And so this is a reference information that the grant team will be providing and sharing with the applicant where, the appraiser will essentially have a checklist, if you will, of the types of information, the types of calculations that need to be included in this appraisal. And so like the willing seller itself doesn't need to reference the agreed upon price, but basically the appraisal report that then goes to DGS review will need to have those compliant and come under compliance essentially. And thank you so much, Elaine, for dropping that in the chat. Is the appraisal part of step 1 or 2? Ooh, excellent question. Yeah. Um, so the way that the grant step process has been laid out is that we will be asking for the appraisal report as part of the step 2, as part of all those necessary documents. And if you are participating in the escrow ready process, it will be asked as part of that complete package. The actual submission, though, to DGS for their review will be after a grant agreement is signed. And this is done so that way the grantee will have access to the funds, and then you could charge the DGS review as part of those acquisition associated costs. And so that will be eligible for reimbursement / coverage through the grant program. Just scrolling through the Q&A and chat one more time. Let's see. I know the team is going to be here until 12:30, so please feel free to hang out if a question comes to you. Please also feel to drop off if you need to go eat lunch. This is by no means the only time to ask those questions. I'm going to go ahead and drop that Tribal Affairs email in the chat again. So if afterwards, an hour, a week from now, you're just like, wait, I had a question after all, please feel free to reach out to us. I think we can post these slides, Megan, since we're also posting the presentation as well.
Yeah, we'll put all the information on our website, which is in the chat here.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.